Thank you for joining us today for this panel discussion on civil liberties in India. I'd like to first introduce the Swatantrata Center, which is a social enterprise which promotes choice and opportunity for all individuals to build a decent life with dignity. We believe in the idea that are particularly important for understanding and supporting the good society, a pluralistic society in which intellectual and economic progress is the norm, and where individuals flourish in a context of openness, voluntary and peaceful cooperation and mutual respect. I'm your moderator for today, Sourya, and let me take this moment to introduce our brilliant panelists that I have with us today. Dr. J.P. Narayan is a physician by training and has served as a member of the Indian Administrative Service for 16 years. He had a tremendously successful tenure and held many important positions in the government of South Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. During the course of his service, he acquired deep insights into the Indian governance process and problems afflicting the nations. Convinced of the need of radical reforms to transform the Indian governance process, Dr. Narayan left the civil service in 1996 and with like-minded colleagues founded a Foundation for Democratic Reforms, FDR, and Lok Satta, a people's movement for governance and political reform. Since then, the Foundation for Democratic Reforms and Lok Satta have emerged as a leading civil society initiative for government reforms. FDR and Lok Satta have played a crucial role in driving several reforms over the year, including being focused on true federalism, effective and accountable local governments, rule of law, education, healthcare, and agriculture. Dr. Narayan, it's always a pleasure to have you with us and welcome you. The next panelist we have with us today is Sriram Karri. Mr. Sriram Karri is a novelist, writer, and journalist. His debut novel, Autobiography of a Mad Nation, was a bestseller in 2015, longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. His first book, Spiritual Supermarket, published in 2006, was longlisted for the Vodafone Crossword Book Award, non-fiction category. His next novel, One Farmer Less, is due for publication. As a columnist and writer, his writings and reportage have been appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, BBC, Huffington Post, Asia Times, Economic Times, and New India Express, to name some. As a speaker and analyst, Karri is generally present on the other side in panel discussions on various national news channels and platforms. He has anchored conversations with several authors, thinkers, editors, and political leaders, including, but not limited to, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Dr. Subramaniam Swamy, Karan Thapar, and Vishwanathan Anand, to name some. He is currently the resident editor of the Deccan Chronicle based in Hyderabad. He has also previously worked with Infosys, Tata Consultancy, Satyam Consultant Computers, Indian School of Business, and Callhead, among others. Thank you once again to both of you, and it's, as usual, always a pleasure to have you join us. Now, to quickly dwell into this topic, as much as we might want, and as much as India is better than other countries, it's no illusion that civil liberties in India are really not at a paramount importance granted by the government. And it's often stated that the reason that the government doesn't give it a lot of importance is because the citizens themselves don't really care much about it. The recent Freedom House Index gives India 37 out of 60 in civil liberties, which allows me to throw open the force and ask the first question to our panelist, Dr. J.P. Narayan, is, does the government of India really care about civil liberties?
Saurav, exercise of coercive power is always a complex thing anywhere in the world. Even in mature democracies, it's prone to abuse. Now, you see the last 1 week or 10 days in the UK, there's a lot of discussion because a young woman, a 28-year-old woman, or maybe 30-year-old woman, was brutally raped and murdered by a police officer. I think only this week that fellow was convicted. We all know about George Floyd murder in the United States. In our own country, your background paper listed many cases. Now, one case that struck me for some reason was at the height of this COVID sanctions. In Chennai city, a father and son for the sin of not following the regulations, the restrictions on account of the COVID, they were innocent villagers, not particularly educated. They were beaten up so badly by the police that both of them perished. They died. So abuse of power, excessive use of power, or treating the people without power or influence with contempt is endemic in any coercive authority. In our country, unfortunately, the society has not moved from feudalism to modernity. The state has not moved from colonialism to democracy. We have the trappings of democracy. We certainly have elections and political freedoms and peaceful transfer of power and so on and so forth. But it would be wrong to claim that we are a full-fledged democracy in every sense, certainly not in rule of law. And there are serious deficiencies. Therefore, my approach would be to look at the institutional deficiencies and see how best to correct them. Just three broad areas. One is obviously how do we ensure independence of the investigative and prosecution agencies? They are now entirely politically controlled, and therefore, you see, whoever is in power is calling the shots, and they become the army of the ruling establishment rather than the servants of the people to enforce rule of law. The second is independence without accountability and disaster. In fact, if there's no accountability, I would prefer that they're actually controlled by the politicians. Therefore, how do you ensure accountability and oversight, effective oversight and accountability? The third is, how do you empower them? Because they're hopelessly inadequate in meeting the modern challenges. Now, when you don't have forensics and so on and so forth, the common method adopted by most police in most cases is the torture, the third degree. And the conviction rate in India is among the lowest in the world, just about 50%. And if confessions extracted largely by brutal methods are excluded, then the conviction rate is only 10 to 15%. So how do really strengthen? All these three must be looked at holistically rather than make it a party political issue or look at one day's events. There is a larger process at work, and one area where there are many areas where we have been deficient in the past 70 years, but one area which requires very urgent attention, and that has implications on the society, liberty, and democracy and political evolution is rule of law. And let's hope that all of us can come up with some ideas which are practical, which are affordable, which are acceptable by all people, and which can be easily translated into action. And I believe there is an agenda. I myself wrote extensively in the Administrative Reforms Commission report on rule of law. And public order is the title, but basically led to rule of law. And recently we conducted a conference, a 9-day conference with some 50, 60 major figures in the country, jurists and lawyers and police officers and civil society leaders and civil liberties activists and so on and so forth. There is an agenda. There is a practical and sensible agenda, taking into account the stakes of all stakeholders. And it's not one or the other. We must take care of the rights of the accused. We must take care of the rights of the victims and the society at large. And there must be a harmonious balance. I think we have failed in a large measure, and we have to set it right.
Thank you, Dr. JP. I'll come back to your reforms note, but on something you mentioned, I have Mr. Sriram Karri weigh in. On the point exactly of the violence which took place during the COVID lockdown, if you notice in a lot of newspapers, when they were reporting about street vendors and all getting harassed by police, a lot of the follow-up comments would be by people saying, yeah, it's a good thing. Why did they go out? Even when the encounter killing happened, surprisingly, people were cheering the cops. And it's same in mass media and all. Generally in movies, highlight cops which break rule of law and go above and beyond. So I want to see Sriram to weigh in here. Is it something wrong? Societally, are we kind of people who want civil liberties for ourselves but not for our neighbors? Or is it that we have been structured for so long?
Okay, thank you, Sourya. And it's good that you kind of brought the entertainment and media and cultural context to rights, which goes back to your core of, is there a demand? Is there a political demand for liberty? Which would then follow that the supply from political side would follow. And my answer to you is not really. Not really, because of the way liberty is contextualized and presented and has been presented for about all of independent era and across the countries in the world. Because in many ways, liberty has been hijacked successfully time and again by different kinds of interests. It looks like liberty is just a statue for a selfie for the world. And though we all need it, we don't profess to want it. It's a beautiful and interesting dichotomy of maybe human condition. I'd ask all of you to, all the youngsters watching this, whatever politics you believe in, profess, advocate, or are currently engaged in, just go by two fundamental definitions or testing rods. One is the state is the legal monopoly holder over the use of force. It's a very important distinction for all the practitioners of liberty to appreciate to its final nuance detail. The state has the legal monopoly over the use of force. And the second thing is, rights are not something the government gives you. Rights are something government cannot take away. And therefore, the whole play of either the flourishing of liberty and rights and reason within both making of laws and its implementation, that whole interplay happens between these two broad thoughts. So ask yourself, at what point or in which context do you advocate the use of force against another person? The only exception is in self-defense. Barring self-defense, when do you believe force should be used? If you're standing on the street, an auto driver goes past, you ask him to come to Charminar, and he says, I'll not go by the meter, I'll charge 500 rupees. Do you believe you should use force against him? A girl from your community is on a motorcycle with a boy from another community. Do you use force? There is a farmer who's not getting remunerative price for his crop. Do you use force against a bank to give him a loan that he need not repay? Each of these situations in life you wish to encounter, take any such situation, you will find a kind of communism, a kind of socialism, a kind of feudalism, a kind of medieval patriarchy at work, a kind of communalism at work, which will say, let us initiate force. I have seen this as a cultural disease, where you're driving on a road and you suddenly see somebody running and everybody says, oh, thief, thief, thief. You know what is the popular phrase in which we respond? Somebody should catch and beat that fellow up. Have you heard that, Sourya? Usko pakad ke marna chahiye. Nobody says usko pakadna chahiye, police ke hawale karna chahiye. Nobody says that. So our first instinct to wrongdoing is initiation of force, either directly, if we have the wherewithal, or indirectly by advocating the role of the state, where perhaps the state should not have a role. Now, all this is theory. Maybe not as much as Ms. Jayaprakash Narayan, but in my own way, I have seen enough of how both the society and politics as well as law in this country actually works from the perspective of lower judiciary, higher judiciary, the police station. I mean, the police station. Some of you must have watched on OTT a lot of dramas in the last 2 years. American serials. Most of you have heard of the First Amendment, Fifth Amendment. In the American context, there's a funny serial, in fact, about an Indian caught by an Indian cop, and he says, "Sir, I'm Fifth Amendment." So the cop gives him one tight slap and says, "You're seeing all the wrong serials. Fifth Amendment is America. The Indian Fifth Amendment is this. The SI leaves an imprint of 5 fingers on your face. That is the Fifth Amendment." And he says, "मैं तेरा face amendment कर दूंगा. तेरे माँ बाप भी नहीं पहचानेंगे." So the kind of brutality that happens and celebrated. I, of course, very, very strongly took on what was called the Disha case and the subsequent alleged encounter. We are right now, in fact, listed in a couple of court cases on its reporting. And let me tell you, liberty at a practical street side level, from the threat of a cop to the larger threat that the parliament might pass a law and take away yet another right of yours, is all real. And that is all happening because of 2 reasons. One, you don't appreciate the value of your liberty, you don't even understand it, till you lose it completely. The second twin dimension to that is Indian fatalism, where you say, it happens to them, to other people, not to me. These people who live in cities think, all these encounters and lathi charges and a politician mowing down somebody happens in the village, then it happens on the urban footpaths, then you say, well, I'm not the guy sleeping on the footpath. A sense of fatalism does abet, make you condone what I call the daylight destruction of liberty, inch by inch, law by law, action by action. There is absolutely nobody to mourn liberty who's in coma, maybe the deathbed. But what would be left of man without liberty? Patrick Henry, give me death, give me liberty. You who celebrate Bhagat Singh, you who celebrate Subhash Chandra Bose, Mahatma Gandhi, don't forget it was a generation that said we would rather sacrifice our lives than be a slave. What is it about this attack on your liberty? Because attack on one person's liberty is indeed an attack on everybody's liberty, that you do not wish to stand up to fight. Your topic was, what is the right time to give up on liberty? My answer is simple: tomorrow. For today, just fight for liberty. When is the time to give up on liberty? Tomorrow, sir. Today, let's fight for it. Let us not allow ourselves to be reduced to animals. Thank you, Sourya.
Thank you so much, Ram, sir. And if I'm hearing you right, maybe even before giving up, we should first get liberty to begin with, which is also something Dr. JP was saying, that we aren't a true democracy in standard of rule of law. So maybe let us get liberty, then we can even think about giving up liberty later. Thank you so much, sir. On that point, JP, sir, you have been a bureaucrat and a politician. But now when you're on this side, if, as you've seen multiple times, and as you pointed out, police go out and lathi charge on crowds protesting explicitly on political orders because their political masters might benefit in certain situations. In that case, what incentive do they have to leave those police be independent from their control? And what can we do then? How can we as citizens safeguard our rights from that situation?
Saro, it's not for the police to decide whether they should be independent of political control or not. They're merely the tools. If it's for the state structure, the elected governments and the society as a whole to decide. You can't allow the armed forces to decide what they would like to do with the arms they have. You can't allow the police to decide what they want to do with the legal powers and the weapons that they have. You can't allow the bureaucracy to decide what they want to do. That's what's happening in the country. Everybody in a position of some authority thinks that that power is personal. They can pretty much do what they like. Therefore, the question, I reject the premise. It's not for the police to decide. It's for us as a society and a polity to decide. The second broad thing is when we talk about protests, it's a bit more complex. It's very easy for us to see the world as black and white. Ambedkar, at the time of approval of the Constitution, he gave a very important admonition to the country, and we failed to recognize that. He said, look, in a colonial era, when there's no freedom, there is no vote, there's no self-government, we adopted certain methods of protest that worked. But in an independent nation, a self-governing democratic nation, there cannot be a protest that is obstructive or violent. I think we have completely failed in understanding this. All political parties, without exception, whether they're in power or out of power, they're guilty of this reckless abandon of the fundamentals of a democratic society, that there has to be peaceful reconciliation. There has to be peaceful, orderly, and non-obstructive protest, is something that we as a society have ignored. And we actually romanticize violent and obstructive protest. That's part of our DNA, thanks to Mahatma Gandhi and Satyagraha and whatever be the Gandhiji's intentions. In actual practice, anything to defy authority, even if you do it unlawfully, obstructing others, rail roko, rasta roko, band, this, that, is perfectly legitimate, is our notion. I think we have to have a very balanced view. You cannot run a modern society and economy by having a very skewed picture. Police are not the villains. They are simply part of this complex, vicious cycle. Policemen are like you and I. They are not people who came from Mars. But the moment they're endowed with some authority, as is endemic in this country, the people in authority, they tend to abuse power. That's true with bureaucracy in general. That's true with police. That's true with the politicians. That's true with many fellows who talk so much about liberties. The moment they are given some authority, I have seen them exceed that authority. So it's a larger issue of the notion of power, because we're still feudal in our society. Power is highly personalized. The second thing is, if you have to address these issues, we have to do it with great dexterity. A very omnibus, casual, or ill-thought-out solutions are very dangerous. As I said before, you must ensure independence of police, but where? Only in crime investigation, not in law and order. Whether you like it or not, management of law and order, crowd control, dealing with protest is a political decision. You don't deal with all protests in a similar manner. If there's a communal riot, you'll be ruthless. If there is a student agitation about some grievances, they go a little beyond what is right, you'd be much more gentle. That's what every country does. That's what every democracy in particular does and should do. Therefore, law and order can never be taken out of political control. We must be absolutely clear about that. But crime investigation must be taken out. And if there is an abuse of power in law and order, for instance, then there must be an independent mechanism to deal with that. Police accountability is an extraordinarily complex affair. I saw in New South Wales state in Australia years ago, there's such layer after layer. They have internal police procedures to deal with abuse and complaints. Then they have what is called inspector, who is part of the accountability commission, the police integrity commission, as they call it, in that as a part of that. And on the inspector, again, that inspector is a judicial officer. And if inspector fails for whatever reason, there's an ombudsman system. Ombudsman would take over. And even that they found is inadequate. Therefore, now they come up with the new institutional arrangements. So you have to have very complex arrangements. World over, it's extraordinarily difficult. If you weaken the police and they can't really be effective in maintaining order or protect the constitutional order, that's a disaster. You have seen what's happened in Afghanistan. Last 2 months, Afghanistan must be very instructive for all of us. So you cannot allow that. You cannot allow Naxalites to simply take over the country. You cannot allow secessionists or extremists using weapons and extraterritorial connections to simply take over a society. That's a disaster. And the second thing is there is a hierarchy. Oftentimes, there is no clash between order and liberty. But sometimes in an extreme situation, there could be actually a clash between order and liberty. And when that is the case, every society intuitively wants order first, because liberty is inconsequential when there's no order. We are all sitting and discussing, somebody comes and beats us up in our respect to rooms or houses or offices. What liberty are you talking about? There's no order. So there are so many layers in this. And there are ways of doing it. There are ways of creating independent police force, independent prosecution, not at all controlled by the political executive, having some kind of judicial oversight. There's complex layers of mechanisms. There's no time to go into details. And there must be an independent mechanism, further independent mechanism to look at the complaints and abuse of power. Independent, this is again judicially driven. So there are mechanisms. But the issue is, how do you create stakes? And I believe the way to create stakes is the police officers who are used to a status quo, but on occasion complain about political control, but are actually quite happy with this omnibus control of all kinds of police activity, from traffic policing to law and order to crime investigation. They must recognize that there are some areas that should be politically driven, some other areas that should not be. The monopoly of power over the monolithic power must be given up. The politician must understand that the areas where legitimately he should intervene, but the areas where it's in his best interest not to intervene. And this is one area. Normally, I'm not a very great fan of judicial overreach in the country. But this is one area where we must probably even formally bring in judiciary in the form of oversight into the police functioning in the crime investigation. And even prosecution. Just like, we bring law secretaries from judiciary. In many states, law secretaries come from the judicial branch of government, and they go back to judiciary after their tenure. Similarly, prosecutors at district level, something like a DA can be brought here. He must be made utterly, obviously, independent, because institutionally and career-wise, that person is independent. And whole prosecution in the district will be under them. So the deficiencies can be overcome. And all this while improving the infrastructure and empowering them. Without adequate forensic capability, let me give just one number. In all of India, in 1 year, the DNA analysis is done in only about 20,000 samples. Typically, a criminal case requires 5 to 6 samples. That means only 4,000 cases. In the United States, they do import about 1.2 million cases in it. So, where is the infrastructure? In the 21st century, if you don't have 21st century infrastructure, but you want 21st century methods, and yet you want to maintain order and some modicum of peace in society, it simply doesn't work. We have to also invest. Our expenditure and investment in law and order, including rule of law, including judiciary, prosecution, crime investigation, etc., is about the lowest in all civilized societies. So look at it holistically.
We have still, I think, just 8 central forensic science laboratories all over India, out of which most of them are understaffed or don't have the actual equipment to do the forensic science test. I'll come to Mr. Karri on the order versus liberty dichotomy, but JP said a quick question for you. From what I gathered, you said a lot of the problem is because there's a lot of power in the government roles and the political role. So in that case, would you say that reducing government's power would increase civil liberties in India?
No, in a broader sense, the problem in India is the government has taken upon itself too much and does it too badly. It's all-encompassing and extremely inefficient. What we require is a narrow role of the government, but efficient role of the government. We have an overarching government which is extremely weak and ineffective. It's only good at abuse of power, but not actual delivery. Power in our country, it seems, has no content without abuse. The ability to deliver is absent. So sans delivery, what is power? It's only abuse. So in a broader sense, we must define the role of the government much more narrowly. And to the extent that they have to deliver, we must empower them adequately. In our country, we do neither. The overarching power, the intuitive approach of Indian people, the normal belief, the default option is almost anything government can do. The government is Raja. We must give up that notion. Government is here to serve certain functions we entrusted to them without tax money. A lot of our life is in our hands. Government is not our my-baap. And to the extent that the government has to deliver, it must be adequately empowered and adequately resourced, period.
Thank you so much, GP sir. Sriram sir, the law and the order versus liberty dichotomy. Would you say that there are certain instances, certain moments when for the beneficial society we might have to sacrifice civil liberties?
See, again, this is an attempt to make the argument very theoretic. If you push me on that, I would say theoretically, I would always stand for liberty over order. But that's a very theoretic argument. We know most of the times the violation of human rights that happen not really because of a clash between these two. The larger, some of which Dr. Narayan pointed out, are so seeped away from this debate. I mean, we could have this debate for the sake of, have a nice engaged debate on this, of course. And I see the value to create a kind of passionate sense of defense in our society, seep this argument culturally using art in the same devious ways that the contra view was imposed, to misguide people. Like that, I see the value of that. But two or three things. One of the most significant is human rights in India. Quite singularly, you have to take police and do something about it. Everybody must understand that the police in India go by an act, a penal code, that I think was passed by a government that was an imperialist,
1857 or 1858.
59,
right after,
I think.
Yeah, 59, right after the mutiny, when the
So we
British
just
government.
a couple of centuries past that. It was a time when you had no post and pigeons used to deliver post, and if you had to intercept the messages of two people, you had to use bows and arrows to bring down pigeons. That is the act which governs you today. But more significantly, what is the philosophy of law behind it? It was very simple, that the Queen's government in India has enemies. These enemies are the people of that country. They're not people, they are enemies. The law, the code was designed to give powers to police to protect the government against the enemy people. This is the core mindset. So, policing as a service instead, policing as a service, policing as a very crucial service. Dr. Narayan spoke about creating the delimitation of government. I can, standing on one leg, on fingers count what the government should do. Police is the first function along with the military and running of courts, nothing else I would say, and stop. And we could have a different debate on tax, welfare, and what are the, etc. This is different thing. But you have to change this penal code to create a 21st century sense of what a police must be. And sometimes symbols are important. For example, I've been advocating that can we just move the uniform from khaki to blue? People say, why would you advocate something so ad hoc? I said, just changes the mind, All the cops will get the new pair of clothes. Blue will look different. We are used to khaki is psychologically created that fear. The moment you see somebody in khaki, you respond in a particular way. I mean, even the RSS has changed the khaki color. Yeah? I mean, high time police moved away. I'm sorry, that was not politically I was saying nothing. Point I'm making is there are certain things that must go. Definitely this penal code and criminal CRPC has to be changed. There has to be a notion of Miranda rights. There has to be a notion of infrastructure, training of police. I mean, how many police even know the Supreme Court guidelines on what you should not do while arresting somebody? And many police who have watched policing know that arrest is a very, filing an FIR is such a difficult, I mean, they talk about zero FIR and all. So basic policing at the SHO and below level, the kind of judicial oversight, interesting suggestion, again, like he also acknowledges, not here to get into the nitty-gritties of it, judicial overload, vacancy, I mean, it's a different, not getting into that side, but definitely we must acknowledge that the police is a very, very big issue. We have to separate police like we did with the power sector. Traffic policing, for example, completely in urban context can be removed from police and new service can be created. Traffic does not require policing in that police sense of a word. It can be managed very differently. Definitely human rights, custodial deaths, even preventive detection. It's legal in India. I mean, you are a lawyer, Sourya, and JP has been like both, in a sense, influencer of policy making as well as its implementation at the highest level in the state kind of a level. So you know what we're talking about. But there are laws that have to go, codes that have to change, trainings that have to change, infrastructure that has to be created. And sometimes, it's possible to influence all of them through art. For example, I know this fact that I believe very honestly that if you start putting cameras, it will have some kind of an influence on traffic. This is my belief, just a whimsical thought. I said, let's test it out. Somebody said, but government will feel afraid. I said, no. Once people realize you can make money by putting cameras, the government started. Of course, what happens now, some crucial case, for example, there was a Rolls Royce or something that hit somebody on that day, the cameras didn't work across Jubilee Hills. That's a different matter. But by and large, that kind of an accountability can be brought in. I've never understood why all the lockups in police station, what is called police custody, can't have live webcams going and sitting into a server for the judiciary to review later. It should be very easy to do. There are certain things, therefore, that can be done. Political will, a combination of resist. But I like all of you to focus on what Ms. Narayan said. It is not for the police to decide how policing can be done. Citizens have a right to assert. For too long, we are caught up with the autocratic, whimsical, corrupt, lathi-wielding, benevolent dictator to evil SHO, SI, whatever at one level, who responds then based on political pressure, who then based on caste and other affiliations, who can you call? The fear in the middle class educated people not to get messed up, even when they come for a political, passport verification, people are afraid. Police now told me they're now going civilian dress to apartments in Gachibowli and all, so that people open the door without fear. So that kind of a sense of change, using art, using science, all these are possible at one level. So it is not a liberty versus order that is the responsible force for a large part of where our liberty goes. I acknowledge there is a debate, there is a doubt, but I don't see that being the principal problem. 80% of the problem is very simple. Even at the level at which the Indian Constitution provides, we are not implementing. Like I said, Supreme Court guidelines on how to arrest, who to arrest, when to arrest is not done. Is not done in high-profile cases also. So where is the question? What debate are we talking about? The guy just said, I won't do it. What will you do? Courts also have to improve their services because they can't, bail, not jail. I mean, the kind of number of people who suffer more than they would under those sections just because of judicial overload and delays, pendency in cases, etc. So basically, where is the doubt? We must believe in that. But all this comes down to a larger point. Who are you as a citizen? What is your relationship with your government? Is government some parent? Or worse, all providing big brother? Are you at their mercy? And therefore, the sentence I said, rights are not something a government gives. Rights are something a government cannot take away. And the scoping, the limiting of government is very simply this. Since government is the legal monopoly holder over the use of force, ask yourself, in which matter force is not needed? At what time should a movie theater be closed? What should be the ticket of a cinema? Is that something you need to use force? Which scene should be seen by who in OTT versus screen? What is the point? Remove censor board, remove courts in this country here, ticket prices, high courts are hearing on what is the ticket price of a movie in Andhra Pradesh versus Telangana. I'm very happy the CGI recently said that corporate cases and all have to hold back. Criminal justice and human rights are important. Yes, I think we must create a pre-identified, declared pro-human rights representative in every judiciary. The judge must say, I am always going to be against government, against establishment. The onus of proof lies on them. I will stand for liberty, and all such cases will come to it. Somewhere that kind of a stance can be done. But all this will come in this country. It's all nice to believe seminars will make advocacies, reforms, and those changes will happen. Somewhere you have to demand. Somewhere you have to go and kiss that statue, which doesn't exist. As a statue means liberty, New York. No, I'm saying that belief that you are a sovereign, inalienable right-holding subcosmic particle. The government is a partner, a service provider. It has the legal monopoly to use force. It works on your tax, some of it involuntarily, but you can stand up to it and question. In other words, in this 75th year of independence, we are celebrating it, right? Amrit Varsh, Amrit Mahotsav. That Amrit of freedom, please drink and taste, because once you taste liberty, you will be very willing to exude the confidence that comes from knowing that should it come to that, I am willing to stand up to say, give me liberty or give me death. And let me tell you, the entire human right violating legal system in India, from the police, from the judiciary officers, all of them are bullies. They are cowards and bullies, very similar to your school bullies. You can stand up to them. And I'll give you a very good practical tip. If you are under threat in India, speak in English, you'll get away more likely than not.
Thank you, Sriram. So I have a question for JP, but before that, because you also spoke on the demand aspect of it and the importance of symbolism. I just want to go back to a question I'd asked in the beginning. Even though there is no demand from the society, right? Do you think there's a symbolic value of the entertainment industry, at least not portraying police either as the villain or as the hero who beats up people? Would there be symbolic value in that?
Could you clarify? You're talking about the way police are portrayed in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, I was asking Sriram sir that even in the beginning when I asked him that the way police are portrayed by the media and the entertainment industry mostly, would you think that this would be a symbolic value if they're portrayed better, even if there might not be a legitimate demand for them to be portrayed better? Because like we discussed, most of us are afraid when we see the police. Is it more because of the news, or is it more because of how maybe even the movies and all portray them?
Well, movies have been useful, and movies are complexly connecting politics and people. Movies are influences of public opinion, but are also products of public opinion. So it's not a one-way traffic that there will be a wise director who will come out of Jupiter or Saturn and give you all wisdom in the form of perfect entertainment. The next Bahubali will leave you coming out of the theater saying, I'm pro-liberty, down with all statism. It won't happen like that, because art influences society, but society also influences art. It's complex. Most of the policemen, depending on who the actor is, you can tell. There is the Artha Satya Om Puri who says, I'm an honest cop, I'm a victim of the system. The only way I can provide justice is by making it a personal vendetta. And it doesn't end well for the villain. In real life, the chances of that happening are very low. A more practical version of it is Nana Patekar, the encounter cop from Mumbai who's complicatedly connected with the mafia. The third is the corrupt, inefficient policeman who sleeps, who'll eat chicken and have whiskey in his thing and, wearing a banyan, removes his shirt, that kind of stuff. Dark age, Hindi heartland, abusive. But I'm telling you from practical experiences, cops are very influenced by how movies are portraying them. I have interestingly heard policemen talk about movies, and if you want, we can even do a discussion on that. We'll get a couple of cops, couple of movie guys, and ask, this guy portrayed you, how did you feel? They don't like it. They don't say it. Cops are very sensitive. For example, if you make series of movies lampooning, they're taking this, what is called Mamul or Hafta, or, I've been doing a minor crusade against it. Of course, 2 weeks and I already get my, kya kar rahe ho, what is going on. And since one of these cops will one of these days take me to jail for a contempt case, I'm also nice to them. Point I'm making, Sourya, is this: art can definitely make a difference. The portrayal of cops is increasingly becoming real. The OTT revolution is making all our cinema real. Even the portrayal of a journalist, even the portrayal of a doctor, a portrayal of an IAS officer, slightly becoming more real. That's as the art itself evolves, the medium evolves. What are the kind of people you need to watch? The threshold. Today you can have what is called only the urban centers watch a movie and make it a hit. So you can make it to very urban sensitivities, but you can't make a pan-India hit without going into rural sensitivities. So you have to airbrush a lot of things. Certain politics you have to be playing at the LCD, lowest common denominator level. So movies, lot goes into planning the politicking. You cannot bring in social reform by artificially saying, I'll hold the film industry to ransom for 10 years and bombard the daylights out of propaganda to create a more liberal, progressive society. That's not going to happen. It did work for a while for communist indoctrinations, poets and all took it, but it happened when people really believed in it. Where is the believable view that if you leave people free, it will lead to a better society? Today, most people actually believe freedom of people is a threat to society and they rather stand by society. If I'm going to advocate today, there should be no censor board. The first people who will panic?
Parents.
Middle class. Sorry, there's a power cut because of rain. So I hope I can.
No, we can hear you. We can still hear you.
Okay, dark ages. But as long as the voice of reason is heard, we can tread on.
Okay.
So my belief I was saved by a little bit of infrastructure. So point I'm making sure is this. Today, middle classes believe government must protect them from the indecencies that will be thrust upon them if you allow people to be really free. The idea of freedom actually frightens people more than the idea of a policeman beating you, than an encounter, than a violation of human rights, than corruption, than anything. The scariest thought, not even the terrorist or the Naxalite, even they can be humanized and presented. The idea of a profit-seeking capitalist left free, the idea of a young girl who will make her choices in terms of what food to eat or who to marry, etc., frighten our society. We are a lot like our penal code. Our minds were all designed, manufactured in 1850s maybe, and we're just recycling them. So time to rescue. So the complex answer to this question would be, where do you begin? That's the question. Do you begin with reforms at the Supreme Court level? Do you begin with parliamentary reforms? Do you begin with culture? Do you begin with art? Do you begin with education? Education itself is a big problem because that is part of the government again, etc. My answer is simple: all the ways. How did you fight a pandemic? You created awareness. You asked people to stay at home. You imposed a lockdown. You made them wear masks. You taught them to wear. Then you started manufacturing vaccines. You're giving out vaccines. You're fighting and all this, and treating some people. This is the way you handle any pandemic. I am in no doubt to say that India has been a pandemic. India has been in a state of pandemic as far as liberty, human rights, and rule of law is concerned for a large part of its existence as an independent nation.
Thank you, Sriram sir. JP, just moving a bit away from police. Sriram sir was talking about high courts and supreme courts and all, but coming a bit lower, when we in litigation, we generally consider the first line of defense for civil liberties is supposed to be the magistrates in India, most of the executive magistrates and all. But you've seen multiple cases, even in the case in Tamil Nadu that you mentioned in the beginning, when the victims were brought before the executive magistrate and were in bloodied courts, the magistrate just sent them back into police custody without even asking why are their clothes bloody. There have been certain videos which have currently been circulating of executive magistrates ordering the police to lathi charge and break protesters' heads and all. Right. So the very entities just supposed to be upholding our civil liberties and protecting them don't. Is it still due to the colonial structure that we have, or is it a symbol of a bigger structural problem that we have right now?
There are two factors at work, Sourya. The first is, I said, colonial. We have in every society a clash between colonial or traditional values and attitudes on the one hand, and the constitutional aspirations on the other. The instruments that you have, sometimes the laws that you have, as Sriram has pointed out, and of course the attitudes we harbor, if they are colonial or medieval, but you have constitutional aspirations and liberties, the challenge is how do you bridge the gap? In an extreme situation like an American Civil War, it may be a brutal civil war and bloodshed. That's not what we want. There has to be this transition. There must be constant attempt to improve the institutions and to reform. That's the true meaning of reform. In India, we have failed to do so. Even today, typically, I know for a fact that in definitely the parts of India where I grew up, if the parents in poorer sections nowadays, and I suppose in the olden days, almost all sections, if they wanted to discipline a baby, a toddler, a child, what are the two words they use? Adugo buchi word. What is that buchi? Bussy, the French general who conquered for some time Masulipatam port, etc. He was a source of terror in coastline. Or the second one is police. Adugo police. Right from early childhood, you inculcate the notion that you must be scared of the police. It's a colonial value. It is directly clashing with the constitutional rights and the principles. But there is a second element in this. Whenever there is a change in the societal order because of economic change, globalization, greater exposure, greater awareness, urbanization in particular, so on and so forth, the needs are changing. And unfortunately, our institutions and governance are not keeping pace with that. What we have seen so far is nothing compared to what we're going to see in the coming years. Already we are seeing in urban India, increasing demand that the policeman must abuse authority, indulge in extrajudicial executions. And doesn't matter how, but if he's the culprit, therefore he's a rapist, he did this, he is a molester, therefore kill him, lynch him. That mentality is growing. But so far, our society is held not by the police or the laws, but because a strong family in an agrarian rural society where everybody knew everybody else. There's no anonymity. And therefore, the social controls, what will my parents think, what will my family think, what will society around me think of me, that is what held people to a certain standard of behavior. Sometimes good, sometimes could be bad also, but whatever it is, there is a certain societal norm which is prevailing. But with increasing urbanization and migration and impersonal lives, that simply cannot continue, even if you want it to continue. And there are features of it that should not continue. That's what Khap Panchayats are about. And unless the instruments of state, instruments of rule of law are able to both handle the potentially increasing crime in the country and do it with protection of civil liberties, ensuring harmonious reconciliation between the two, we are going to face a disaster. We are still seeing nothing. India relatively is crime-free. Most people think, my God, India is totally crime-ridden. It's not true. We have about 377 crimes registered for 100,000 population in a year. United States has violent crimes alone, serious crimes alone, 2,500 crimes per 100,000 population per year. Britain, all crimes, 7,500. You take almost any parameter of major crime, India would be at the very low end of the spectrum, very low. That will not last. The traditional society enforced certain code of conduct, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And therefore, the deficiencies of policing were not really seriously very costly. But that's no longer true. It's not a surprise that Delhi has the highest crime in the country. The number of abductions or rapes per 100,000 population, Delhi is by far the highest. Much of India is going to be Delhi, or worse. You go to Lahore today, or Mexico. Life is a disaster. It's unbelievably bad. The fear of crime, the fear of abduction, fear of molestation, rape, mafia, organized crime, etc. Almost everybody has a story to tell. My friend, my family member, my girlfriend, girlfriend's brother, whatever, everybody has a story to tell. So there is a tremendously, earlier you asked me, what are the incentives? Why will they change? Society may not understand the complexity of it, but society intuitively understands that crime is growing and my children are in greater danger. Now, what we should do, the opinion makers, those in power or those who have merely some influence, is to make people understand that there's a link between what we seek in terms of justice and safety for our families and the institutions, the way we build them. I'm an optimist. I believe that will happen. And even the people who are now have vested interest in status quo, the police officers who enjoy a monopoly of power, therefore, while they occasionally complain, don't want real change. The politician who actually controls crime investigation, therefore, he can harass his opponents and protect his supporters. They may feel that they have an incentive to perpetuate status quo. But a politician who fails to control crime is ultimately in danger. It may be slightly more long-term, that's all. A police officer who becomes an object of revulsion instead of respect is not going to be happy. Therefore, it's a matter of time. But without things becoming uncontrollable, wisdom demands that we do it now and prepare the people, make them see the links between what we seek in terms of reform and what they seek in terms of safety and justice.
Thank you, JP. We have a lot of questions from the audience, but before going to that, just a quick follow-up, JP Garu. Would you say, because you mentioned a number of cases registered, would you think that the number of cases registered is a good matrix, or the number of cases that are actually solved? Because in India, there might often be cases where you'd rather not go to the police to file a case, because that might be a bigger issue for you.
Sourya, undoubtedly some cases are not reported, but it's take a totality aggregate. Not many crimes are going unreported. Rapes, for instance, is one area where perhaps underreporting is very huge because of social stigma, etc. But many other crimes, unless they're very petty things, they will be reported. What you're talking to about civil cases. Civil cases, most people don't even bother to go to a court of law because they believe there's no justice there. Therefore, they swallow injustice, suffer silently. With tears in their eyes, they would much rather not go to courts. That's why India is unique. Out of the 3.6 crore, 36 million cases pending in courts, India has 29 million cases, 28, 29 million cases, or 26, 27 million cases are criminal cases. World over, civil cases are twice the number of criminal cases. India, criminal cases are almost 3/4. It's not an accident, because there are missing cases. Civil cases are simply not going to courts. Criminal cases, some may be underreported, but the totality cannot be, it can't be 90% underreported, maybe 5-10% underreporting. Therefore, that number has validity. And we have to improve the accuracy of the number, but we have to have a number. We can't simply, in India, we're very fond of talking in the air without any data. We have to improve the accuracy of data, but you can't simply have non-data as the basis of argument or discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. J. Thank you so much, sir. Now, there are a couple of questions which have come up. I'll try to take as many as we can as far as we have the time limitations. So the first one that I see here essentially is about the challenges for democratic government in the midst of emergencies, considering we just crossed one. how do we ensure that people can hold their own civil liberties are safeguarded in the middle of an emergency? Because we just passed a pandemic emergency and we saw our civil liberties just going out of the door. So I'd go to ask both of you to weigh in quickly on this.
Sourya, what we don't often acknowledge and what the people in authority don't adequately realize or articulate is, on the whole, Indian people are amenable to following a sensible law or a rule. Now, while we all know the chaotic traffic of Hyderabad, therefore it's very difficult to believe that we are actually law-abiding. But that's an exception. And that's because we are particularly loose in enforcing that traffic conduct. But otherwise, Indian people don't generally defy authority mindlessly, provided the law or the rule seems to be sensible and the decisions made are in our interest. Even if there is a short-term strife, people are willing to endure that pain for the good of the society or for the long-term good. And therefore, coercive use of power must be absolutely minimal. In case of pandemic restrictions, I find it absolutely amazing that physical violence is used against people who did not follow the COVID norms. It's ridiculous. Yeah, maybe a monetary penalty after a couple of warnings would be good. But there's absolutely no case for use of force. And it's not necessary. In all my experience as a district magistrate, and I was not one of those namby-pamby, incompetent buffoon. I was regarded as a very effective district magistrate. I never had to use force. The moment even if there's 10,000 hostile crowd, the moment I stood up and said, this is not it, this is the way, almost always there is compliance and there is orderly behavior. You must be consistent and you must have credibility and you must be balanced and rational. Once these three things are assured, you're not doing something outrageous, you are consistent, and you have the credibility, the past record, people generally comply. Therefore, use of force must be the last resort. Yes, if there's a communal riot, I would unhesitatingly say, go shoot the fellows, as many as is possible. If they simply come and kill people or use knives, etc., no mercy there at all. But these are exceptional. In general, use of force must be the last resort, but when you use it, you must be decisive. You can't be namby-pamby about that either. We are very confused in our country. We resort to use of force very casually. When there is use of force, we think that there should not be any injury. No. Either there is use of force or there is no use of force. There can't be both the situations coexisting. This confusion is absolutely dangerous for the country.
Thank you, Sanjay. Sriram, would you like to weigh in? But with that, I would want to weigh in on another question. The question says this: we all know that police are into politicians' hands. But why is it that we never make it an issue? Why is it that it's not even a voting issue in an election? Are we not concerned enough?
No, I like to say two things. One, I agree with him that Indian people are obedient of law by and large. It is my grouse against them forever. That's a different matter. So by and large, they'll follow law, like he said, traffic and all. Some places where you're hell-bent on not equal, fine. The use of violence, therefore, by police against a law-abiding citizen, by and large, that violence has to be removed. And there is only one reason why it doesn't happen. And I'm telling you this, here is one place where I can give you a very disruptive solution. We can achieve it in 7 days. Dismiss at least 2 to 3 DGPs, 200 DSPs, find it as an artificial target to create fear in a cop that he can lose a uniform. Break every law in doing so, no problem. And 10,000 constables, let them be fired. Let the uniform guy have no uniform next day. And this fact that police can be fired, today they are suspended, departmental inquiry, no. Find 20 judicial tyrants, I use the word tyrants, who viscerally hate cops, make them the ombudsman to fire. And every cop in India knows nothing will happen to him. This absolute sense of immunity is what is the problem. So it's very easy to, I tell you one thing a cop is afraid of. Every cop, from DJP to the traffic constable, is losing the uniform before retirement. Cops have a nightmare called retirement. The fact that they can be fired tomorrow, here you are dismissed. Just bring that executive, let that power be misused also, no problem, for a while. Let us have a lot of churn. This whole except transfer, nothing can happen, thing has to go. If this happens, what will happen is, the moment police are afraid, they will not use violence. It will begin with cities, it will percolate to smaller towns because transfers. Second thing that will happen is, as people stop seeing policemen beat you up, etc., you will engage more and start demanding. Moment this service comes across a more discerning, demanding kind of people, they will start learning the attitude, the body language of being closer to a democratic reality and ideal that we would wish than the feudal. I don't even know which century they belong by, and I engage with cops regularly at the SI level, SHO level, constable level to slightly up. I know how they think. You have to just get a few cops fired. I am giving you a target, 5 DGPs, 25 commissioners. Let's randomly select 20,000-30,000 cops, limited across. Let us give that power to some mad tyrant. Let them misuse. We'll tell them you take bribes and fire good cops also, no problem. Let the fear go in cops, you can lose the job. Problem solved.
Sorry, I wish it were that simple.
Would you want to weigh in on this?
Sriram, like many citizens, in a moment of anger, is simply giving expression to that anger. But no, what he says applies equally to a large number of politicians, bureaucrats, judges. If you go about randomly punishing or sacking people, it will be a recipe for disaster, is self-evident. You must have a very strong system of accountability. But if you don't have a properly designed mechanism to enforce accountability and pick the right targets, it will be extremely dangerous. In fact, it will go against the best cops, best politicians, best bureaucrats, best judges. If, however angry we are, we must hasten slowly. We must be extremely thoughtful. Otherwise, it will be a recipe for anarchy. And already there is far too much of anarchy in our governance process in the country, arbitrariness. I'm sure Sriram doesn't mean what he says, but he's basically expressing anger, that sense of urgency that I share completely.
JP said, do you disagree with the idea of firing corrupt cops instead of putting them on suspension and all?
No, I completely agree with firing not only corrupt cops, but corrupt bureaucrats. I repeatedly asked the Prime Minister in the wake of demonetization. One, it was done badly, demonetization. But even if it's done well, with the benefits to accrue, you must identify the most corrupt officials in the country. 1,000 at the national level and 100 in each major state must be removed under Article 312, not randomly, not casually or flippantly. There is a due process. There's a way of identifying people. During the infamous emergency, actually, in some of the states, they identified the bad apples and retired them quietly, effectively. So there are ways of doing it. You can't do it randomly out of anger. There must be a due process, a transparency, and a standard met, and constitutional values cannot be ignored. Whether you like it or not, there is a constitutional system still operational in this country.
Thank you so much, JP sir. Thank you so much, Sriram sir. Since we have positive time, I'll end with one final question and I'll take a last comment from both of you. One of the questions that we asked is judicial independence supposed to be a prerequisite for a good rule of law in India? Or is it supposed to be a part of government?
I don't even understand the question because judicial independence.
I think what the author is trying to ask is, do we need if we have an independent judiciary, would we automatically end up having police reforms as such? Or should we focus on?
We have independent judiciary, but we haven't had police reforms, right?
Yeah.
So the question answers itself. Our judiciary is undoubtedly it's incompetent, yes. That's a different matter. But it's independent. It's institutionally independent. If some people choose not to be independent, it's not because of the constitutional structure or the law. So we do have independent judiciary. That's why independence is not enough. Accountability, efficiency in delivery, serving the purpose. Everybody in India wants independence. Election Commission, successively, they keep writing to Government of India, give us the same status as the the Supreme Court, and give a separate budget not voted by Parliament, tell me which election commission was denied by which Parliament any money for conduct of elections? So these are all myths. You don't require more protection as an election commissioner. Already you have enough protection. So we have this self-aggrandizing notion that my budget should not be voted by the Parliament, that my employees should be completely under my control and they'll be appointed as I please, but there should not be overall architecture. So every agency of government wants to declare independence at the cost of the country in the name of the people. So independence, yes, but accountability along with that. Now the Information Act, which we brought with great effort, Calcutta High Court went to the Information Commission and argued that the Act does not apply to them. I was very careful while drafting. I particularly took care of that provision that every authority constituted under the Constitution of this country or the law of the land is a public authority. You know what Calcutta High Court claimed? They said that we are not created by the Constitution. We pre-existed the Constitution. We were appointed by the Charter of the Queen of England. They went to that absurd length. So every institution in the guise of independence cannot be unaccountable. Independence is to serve a purpose, not to aggrandize themselves.
Thanks. Sriram sir, should want to end on this?
Oh, well, I think the question itself was missing. As you point out, judiciary is reasonably independent and reasonably autonomous, as much as, at least by design and practicalities and appointments, all those keep changing. That I don't think is a major issue and not directly related to police reforms in that sense. That's a different beast to be tamed very differently. And I acknowledge that what is said was very sensible and moderate and very acceptable to everybody. I don't see that really as a concern. The idea that every department, every wing of the government starts to ape the worst example, that little island of sovereignty of saying, I see from the Constitution, I am supreme, I am beyond being questioned, unaccountable. I would like to have the most powerful features of every wing in making myself more accountable, unanswerable, whether it's through finance, whether it's through oversight, whether it is through service rules and so on and so forth, I think is a dangerous trend. Basically, the idea that you hold public office for power, either for the sake of it or corruption, which is translating it into some kind of a personal benefit for yourself and, you know, a set of people around you, that notion has to go. We have, of course, focused a large part on police and judiciary because they all relate to directly to the criminal law part and human rights violations. The most urgent, the most depressing kind, like the lathi charge on poor migrants going away home with a sudden lockdown. There was no need to beat them. I mean, that's inhuman, right? It's sadism. And I also, as a journalist, traveled a lot during lockdown. And I'm telling you, the police on a lockdown day, different beast altogether, no doubt about it. But the bureaucracy also, I also didn't bring it up because not directly related, but don't forget a large part of everything that happens beyond the criminal when it comes to civil matters, business matters, the economic discretionary power in the hand of the bureaucrat. And I say it in the presence of a former IAS officer, CS, etc. To me, the greatest threat to this country is the IAS, not the police, not the politician, not the judiciary, not the corrupt, shallow media, not the broken education system, not the bad healthcare system, none. The bureaucracy. But it was clearly beyond the ambit of this in a direct sort of a sense. So we do need, and they represent the unaccountable imperialist mindset that the other services follow. After all, you know, in India, we like to look up to the top rankers. And you know, your mother, father tell you, "Arey, look at that bhaiya, he's topped that exam, you should be like him." So IAS normally are the toppers in UPSC by and large. So all the other services, IPS, forest, revenue, railway, everybody apes them. And they are the apex unaccountable force. And I think reform should stem from there. But I do believe we are in better times because you people know more, you people are less likely to obey law, I hope. Not the good law, please follow it. I'm not saying break law, but the spirit of everybody can be questioned. Everything can be questioned. Everything must be questioned. And that which cannot be questioned must surely be questioned. I think the greatest change will happen when you start throwing the questions at these people. Each of these institutions, why? Through social, you don't have abuse on social media. Trust me, nothing rankles an official as much as a question. I am saying this as a journalist. Nothing. I mean, if you abuse them, maybe they won't feel so bad, but when you ask them a polite question, why did you do this? Why did you not consider this law? Very respectfully, that unnerves them. Authority is shallow. The reverberation of a question will last for very long. So my only invocation to each one of you who's listening to this is this: engage with different branches of the government as a conscious citizen. Start learning more and more, both at the level of theory, of law, context, as well as practically. Go to a collector's office, go to a police station, find some good excuse. I'm not saying go to police station ever so often as a, frequent traveler or something, but once in a while get to know and see and use your power to question. You will find very interesting answers for yourself. And importantly, you will leave behind a little doubt in the mind of that unaccountable autocrat. So please engage, ask questions nicely, respectfully, politely, with a lot of research. Be insistent. And once they become answerable, I think rest of it will fall. In that sense, liberty, like autocracy too, is a viral. You plant that first seed, question. And I'm pretty sure, reason for my optimism, his optimism is because I believe you are less likely to accept authority on face value, more likely to question, and your voice will have more echo because of technology. It's not that we were Luddites in our era or generation, but we did not have the wherewithal to make our voice be really heard effectively. Today you can. So use your mobile phone. That's the best weapon against all governments or everything going wrong in every part of the government. And I think if you do that, I don't think 1 billion mobile phones is an onslaught. Anything going wrong in the government can fight against for long. We'll have a better country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sriram sir. Before I go to JP sir for his final closing comments, the only time I had a police change how they behaved with me was when I asked them if they know which section they charge my client. It's after I asked them which law, but when I realized they didn't know which law they were charging him under. But that does help if you start asking them. Dr. JP, your final comments.
Sourya, I'll be brief. First of all, we must not assume that everybody in police is a bad fellow. Actually, a lot of people are hardworking, honest, public-spirited, working against heavy odds to protect public interest. In fact, police in India are extremely overworked, under-resourced, understaffed. We have among the significant countries the lowest police population ratio, the lowest infrastructure, in a very complex, diverse country where many political failures are converted into law and order problems. The police, because they wear the uniform, they are visible, they are seen as the enemy. The issue is much more complex. Therefore, vilifying the policeman is not a solution. In the United States, for instance, they said defund the police. There's nothing more absurd than that. It's like defunding your hospitals. It's like defunding your defense forces. It's like defunding your administration. What rubbish are we talking? If there is a problem, we need to fix it, because no state, no society can function without the coercive arm of the state, because the purpose of a government, as Gladstone said, is to make it easy for people to do good and difficult to do evil. And the tools are the law and the law enforcement machinery. Without that, it's only talk. Ordinarily, in a sane society, for 95% of people, there must not be recourse to law enforcement machinery. But on occasion, for a small number, that is necessary. And if that is not adequately and efficiently and honestly and constitutionally validly deployed, there will be anarchy. So let's not make the policeman or the bureaucrat or the judge or the politician the enemy. It's very easy for us to see enemies all around. It's a typical filmy kind of a thing. A polarity, a protagonist, antagonist. There's a clash and protagonist wins, antagonist is doomed. And the life doesn't work like that. The second is, I'm a great optimist. Things actually have improved considerably compared to what they were 100 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 30 years ago. There's a lot more accountability, a lot more responsiveness. I'm absolutely certain about it. Is it enough? By no means. But is there improvement? Yes. Better is good. But there's a gulf between what should happen and what is happening. And that's where collective informed assertion, not merely anger and lashing out, but collective, individually, if you fight, sometimes you could be victims. That doesn't help us. I don't want martyrdom. Collective, but informed. Without knowledge, simply without insight, some insights. Everybody can't be an expert everywhere. But without some real understanding and insights, if you argue, Shor Machana is very Indian. Everybody everywhere makes noise. God knows what they're doing. In this tent, there's one noise, another tent, exactly opposite noise. Both are equally good. Both are heroes in our eyes. Absurd. We have become illogical. The decibel level cannot dictate our attention. That will not certainly make change possible. It must be rationality. It must be based on evidence. It must be based on best practices and our own past experience. And then the assertion of the informed citizens, even if it's a relatively small number, has profound impact. As Margaret Mead said, that's the only thing that ever changes the world. It's not millions of people marching on the streets. Let me let you out a secret. The Lokpal bill, millions marched. That didn't make a difference at all. It's a myth. In fact, they marched for a concept which is sound, but for a bill which was very flawed. It was a stupid bill, well-meaning. Everything well-meaning is not sensible. We must not be confused because these are good people. What they're saying is good. No. Good people may say stupid things. You require, that's why informed, wise. Not everybody can be enlightened, but at least a small group of people. At least if we are all discussing, at least those who are interested in a particular thing, today it may be rule of law, tomorrow may be healthcare, day after tomorrow may be education, the day after something else. It doesn't matter what it is, but we have an obligation, because every decision we make or every slogan we articulate and every advocacy we indulge in, if it's implemented, has profound consequences to millions of people. It's an act of arrogance to be reckless in our demands or in our articulation. How dare we believe that we know about the millions of people, what is good for them, unless we are so grounded, so thorough, so knowledgeable, so experienced, so capable of absorbing others' experience and learning with humility. I cannot underestimate its importance. I cannot overemphasize its importance. It's incredibly important. And finally, I believe that the world is changing, and India is changing too, but it must change much faster. Our economy is simply performing suboptimally. Our country's global influence is suboptimal, largely because we have not set our house in order. This is important not only from our own personal point of view, our own liberties, our own economic prosperity, our incomes and our future, and our level of comfort and harmony in society. From a broader humanities point of view, what we do in this country is important. China, with its model of an illiberal autocratic government, but very efficient delivery of services and economic growth, has become a very powerful magnet. Earlier, we all assumed that liberty, economic freedom, and rule of law and equality before law automatically guarantee prosperity. For the first time, that is being challenged on the global arena. And if India fails, not only a failure for the 1.4 billion people of India, not only it miserizes our population, it actually sets a terrible example to the world. In a very fundamental sense, would have failed mankind. And many Indians, rightly or wrongly, claim that we are Vishwagurus and all that. I don't know if we are Vishwagurus, but at least let's not set a bad example to the world. We have an obligation to ourselves and to the rest of the world. But I believe that all is not bleak. There's a lot that can be done. And there are ways of doing it in a practical way, in a sensible way, in a societal sense, non-disruptive way. While we require disruptive ideas, you cannot allow social disruption. Societal disruption is anarchy. So there are ways of doing it. And I really want all the participants and people who are looking at it, be thoughtful, be committed, be informed, and assert collectively. I'm sure we'll make that change happen. It may not happen during my lifetime fully. I embarked on this journey hoping that in 5 years' time, India will be transformed, because once you are a student of science and technology, once you have evidence, you have logic, you have a solution, it must be implemented. But in real life, world over, it takes time. Sometimes it takes unreasonably long time. You can accelerate the process. We can be very smart about it. We can be better at communication, but you cannot always compress time. But no matter how long it takes, let's accelerate it, but let's make it happen. We owe it to ourselves. All the best.
Thank you so much, Dr. G.P. Narayan. And thank you, Sriram, sir. I'd close this with thanking all the audience members we have been here. In the last 5 minutes, I've got a ton of questions, but unfortunately, because of time, we'll have to close it here. So let me thank you again, speakers and our audience, and close on this note. As discussed, seemingly India is a 21st century country with a 18th century rule of law and a 15th century, perhaps, societal mentality. Hopefully, in some more years, we'll ensure that we can at least bring it up to the 20th century in terms of a law and our mentality. There's something I really like saying about rule of law is that theory is when you know everything but nothing works. Practice is when everything works but nobody knows that. In the government's approach to rule of law in India, theory and practice are combined. Nothing really works how it's supposed to, and nobody really knows why. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us again. And I wish you all a very pleasant evening and a great weekend.